Hi kids and welcome to Yupp Master. We've begun with the chapter of Animal Kingdom and we've discussed all the invertebrates till date. Alright, we've done all the phyla also. So let's just recall all the names of the different phyla that we have learned belonging to the non-chordates. Alright, so today what we'll do is we will basically just give a quick recap of these phyla by just discussing them in the form of MCQs. Also, according to your NCERT textbooks, the tabular forms which have been given are definitely asked in your NEET exams as various MCQs. So we'll go through those as well, and we will sum up the lecture today by discussing the phylum of Hemichordata. Alright, so we begin with just going through which were the different phyla that we have studied until now. So if you remember, we have done this in groups of 3. The first 3 phyla began with the very simplest of them, and the most simplest organisms, those were the poriferans, that is the sponges. So we began with phylum Porifera, continued with Cnidaria. Third one was the Ctenophora, right? After this, the next group of three phyla that we saw were the worms. Now, if you remember when we learnt about the worms, the first worm we learnt about was the flatworm. And do you remember that when we want to use the term for worm, we use the word helminth, right? Helminth always means worm. So when we talk about flatworm, it is called as Platyhelminthes. Roundworms would be the Aschelminthes and ringworms would be the Analytes. After Analytes, the next phylum the next phylum that's there after Annelid is the Arthropoda. Arthropoda followed by molluscans, where we learnt all about the snails, and then the Echinodermata. So concluding with this, our last lecture was all about the echinoderms, where we learnt about the sea cucumber, the sea star, the star lily. Right now, today's lecture is going to be towards the end of it. We're going to be discussing the connecting links. Since we have completed all the non-chordates and we are yet to begin with the chordates, there is one phylum in between which is behaving like a connecting link between the non-chordates and the chordates, and that phylum is going to be called as the Hemichordata. Alright. So first of all, let's have a look at this chart which is there in our NCERT textbook. Okay, if you see according to this chart, first of all, look at the columns which are mentioned here. The first column being that of kingdom, the second column being that of levels of organization, third one being symmetry, fourth one being body cavity or the coelom you can call it as, and the last one being the examples. Now, when we talk about the kingdom, we know that we are speaking only about kingdom Animalia here, and these are a whole discussing about those organisms which are specifically multicellular. Then kingdom Animalia can be according to their level of organization, there could be divided into 2 categories, one being the cellular level, where there is just going to be a aggregate of cells which are not coming together to form a tissue. And then if they come together and they do happen to form a tissue, then it would be either the tissue which can further go on to the organ or organ system level of organization. After this, when we talk about the symmetry of the body, either it could be asymmetrical or radially symmetrical or bilateral symmetry. Now, when we speak about the cellular level, understand one thing, that there is only one phylum which has cellular level of organization, and that is none other than Porifera. Now, in cellular level of organization, in the poriferans, we see that they are mostly all asymmetrical, right? So what we'll do is let's just first discuss this one row that they've given here, and then we will head on to the row of tissues. So cellular level of organization in the poriferans, they are mostly asymmetrical, and they are, when we talk about the body coelom, what is the coelom? The cavity which is formed by splitting of the mesoderm is what we call as coelom. So here when we talk about poriferans, the coelom is basically not split, or rather, in fact, if you see the number of germ layers, then poriferans have only 2 germ layers, and if they have 2 germ layers, then they do not have a mesoderm. So if they don't have a mesoderm, then obviously there will be no splitting of mesoderm, which includes this phylum under the acoelomates. So we're done with the discussion of this first row. Coming to the next row of tissue or organ system level of organization. Well, according to their symmetry, either these animals can be radially symmetrical or they may also be bilaterally symmetrical. Alright. Now understand one thing, that of these two, Bilaterally symmetrical organisms are the ones which are further advanced. These are considered to be more advanced because their cephalic region is prominently seen, alright, which means that their head region is prominently seen here. So we see here that there is radial symmetry, there is bilaterally symmetrical. The animals which are radially symmetrical, these are said to be, or these are all seen to be acoelomates, alright, which means that even if they do have a mesoderm, the mesoderm is not going to be split at all. That's why we call these animals as acoelomates. Now, these acoelomate animals can be of the two phylum, which are Coelenterata, which is nothing but Cnidaria, and the third one which is Ctenophora. So you have two phyla belonging to the ones which are observing radial symmetry, and they are acoelomates. Alright, so one is Coelenterata and the second one being Ctenophora. Next, when we speak about the other organisms which follow tissue or organ system and not radial symmetry, but if they are following or if they are observing bilateral symmetry, then according to their body cavity, we can distinguish them into three types. Body cavity in a bilaterally symmetrical animal, either it could be having no body cavity, where we call it as an acoelomate, okay, or it could be having a false body cavity, which we call as a pseudocoelomate. The one without a body cavity and is bilaterally symmetrical, this is the phylum none other than the flatworms, that is the Platyhelminthes. But the bilaterally symmetrical animal which has a false coelom, in fact I'll tell you that out of all the phyla that we have studied, it is only this phylum which is observing the false coelom, and that is called as pseudocoelomate, and the example of the phylum given there is called as the Aschelminthes. Okay, it's known as Aschelminthes. So you have all these we have distinguished first initially with the level of organization, and now we have reached all the way up till the level of the body cavity. The third topic we'll talk about are the bilaterally symmetrical animals which have a true coelom. If they have a true coelom, you may also call these organisms as eucoelomates. Okay, eucoelomates, because EUU means true. So you have now, according to the body cavity or the coelom, we have three categories here. First is the acoelomate, second being the pseudocoelomate, and third being the coelomate. Alright, so over here in the coelomates or in the true coelomates, we have all the remaining phyla present, right from Annelida to Arthropoda to Mollusca, Echinodermata, and today what we'll be studying, that is the Hemichordata. Now, also when we are going to be discussing about chordates, even chordates, all of them are having a true coelom present. So when you see this whole table on this chart that's given in our NCERT textbook, what they basically can do is that any one of these can be taken as a box and they may just hide this terminology, and that would be given as your options for your MCQ to be solved. So please look into this table that's given in our NCERT textbook. Apart from this table, when we want to just categorize the general characteristics of all the different organisms which are present, then this is a table that we have made here. First, we are speaking about the germ layers. Second, we talk about the body plans available, or third, we talk about the body symmetry which are present. Fourth, we may speak about the coelom, and fifth, about the organization. Now, over here I have mentioned the names of all the phyla which are present, and what we will do is, depending upon which phylum it is, okay, depending upon what is the characteristics, we will see where exactly the characteristic is changing, at what level or at which phylum is this characteristic changing further. Alright, so let's begin with how we'll approach this whole tabular form. First of all, we begin with the first phylum, that is Porifera. Alright, now in Porifera, and when we talk about the germ layers, you can see here that when we speak about germ layers, Poriferans, either you may, rather it would be better if we categorize these as having no germ layers at all. But some reference books have given this as a diploblastic organism. So, right from Platyhelminthes, okay, or rather you can say until the phylum of Platyhelminthes, all the remaining organisms above it are going to be diploblastic. This table is the very reason why from our first lecture I have been emphasizing you to remember the names of all these invertebrate phylums in order. So this table becomes easier to learn. So what we will do is we will demarcate the differentiating characteristics where they are present by a star on this table. Okay, so we have here first this star over here at Platyhelminthes, that is indicating that from Platyhelminthes onwards and below it, it is all going to be only and only triploblastic. Alright, means that there's going to be 3 germ layers. Which are those 3 germ layers? The outer ectoderm, the middle mesoderm, and the inner endoderm. Alright, next talking about body plan. Well, in body plan, there are basically, if you remember, there were 3 types of body plans which we have studied. First was the cell aggregate, second being the blind sac, and third being the tube within tube. When we talk about cell aggregate, there is only one phylum involved there, and that is the Poriferans. Alright, talking about next, we begin with the tube within tube. Well, all of them you can see are tube within tube except 2 phyla, and those 2 phylum are first Cnidaria, which is observing blind sac body plan, and then the Platyhelminthes, which is also observing blind sac body plan. So that's why what we'll do is we'll mark a star at first Porifera for cell aggregate, at second Cnidaria for having a blind sac, and the next one having a blind sac is Platyhelminthes with blind sac. All of our other phyla are having tube within tube body plan. Next column, we learn about the symmetry. If you remember, symmetry in any organism could be 3 types. Either it could be asymmetrical, or it may be radially symmetrical, or it may be bilaterally symmetry. So here, asymmetrical is found only in the animals which are belonging to the phylum Porifera. And now what we need to remember from this column is the ones which are radially symmetrical. All the other ones are bilaterally symmetrical. So radially symmetry is observed in 3 of the phyla. One belonging to Cnidaria, second Ctenophora, and the third one is Echinodermata. So you have radially symmetrical organisms as Cnidaria, Ctenophora, and Echinodermata. All the other ones are bilaterally symmetrical. Talking about coelom, there are, what exactly was coelom if you remember? Coelom was nothing but splitting of the mesoderm, alright. So the mesoderm, when it is split in such a way that a part of the mesoderm is lining the body wall and a part of the mesoderm is covering the alimentary canal, then that space that's formed in between by splitting of that mesoderm is what we're going to be calling as a coelom. Okay, so now we have 3 types of coelom, and those 3 types of coelom, remember this one very important part, that they are distinguished at the levels of the worms. So you have 3 worms if you remember. There was the flatworm, there was the roundworm, and then there was the ringworm. So we have the phylum which are called as Platyhelminthes, Aschelminthes, and Annelida. So when we just demarcate Platyhelminthes here, it is acoelomate, right? And it is also indicating that all the phyla which are above Platyhelminthes are showing acoelomate type of coelom. Next, when we talk about Aschelminthes, this is the only phylum which is observing pseudocoelom, and then followed by Analytes. These are the ones where the first, or rather these are the first phyla where coelom actually came into existence. So after Annelid onwards, all the way down, they are all going to be found to be coelomates. Even the chordates, even us, all of us, we are all coelomate type of animals. Alright. And the last column that we saw here, that is of organization. There were 3 types of organization levels present. Either it could be having a cellular organization, as we can see in Poriferans, or there may be tissue level of organization, as seen in Coelenterata, that is in Cnidarians, and also in Ctenophora. Ctenophorans are those animals which were observing bioluminescence, right? And then when we see Platyhelminthes onwards, all of the phyla are belonging to an organ system level of organization. So now what you can do is just take a screenshot of this whole table with the stars which are demarcating the differentiating features. Alright. So let's continue. After learning these 2 tables which are explaining to us the detailed general characteristics of all the different phyla belonging to the invertebrates, let us begin this session with discussing some MCQs which are covering Not only the general characteristics, we'll also be looking into the details and the special features of the different phyla we have discussed until now, and then we'll conclude the lecture by talking about hemichordates. Alright, so let's begin with our first MCQ. Okay, the incomplete digestive system is found in. Now before we start with any of the options, first let's just discuss about what exactly is the incomplete digestive system. When we say that the digestive system is incomplete, okay, this is basically going to mean that there is only going to be one opening. Okay, for what? For the digestive system. So there is only one opening which is going to be serving both as mouth and as the anus. All right, now we see here that the options given are A, arthropoda, B, annelids, C, platyhelminthes, and D, aschelminthes. So we see here that the incomplete digestive system over here, it is found in the flatworms, and the flatworms here are the platyhelminthes. For example, like if you see a planaria, there is only one opening which is serving as a common opening for both mouth as well as for the anus. Alright. Next MCQ we see, the digestive system is first completed in which phylum? Now, if I am talking about a complete digestive system, then this is basically going to mean that there is a mouth on one end, okay, and then there is going to be an anus, and that anus is supposed to be on the opposite end. So basically, whenever, generally most of the times, we have the mouth and the anus, whenever they are at opposite ends and they both are a specific opening, then this is what we're going to be calling as a complete digestive system. And look at the four options which have been mentioned. First is arthropoda, second is annelids, third is platyhelminthes, and fourth is aschelminthes. So out of these, if you remember, it is aschelminthes which is having a proper mouth and an anus opening which are separate and at our opposite ends. The phylum right before aschelminthes, that is platyhelminthes, is the one where there was an incomplete digestive system. So right after platyhelminthes, we talk about the roundworms, aschelminthes, where they are having a complete digestive system. Alright, so the correct answer over here, children, would be D, aschelminthes. Alright. Next MCQ, open circulatory system occurs in. What exactly was open circulatory system? It was the system where in the circulating fluid is not going to be found in blood vessels. So basically over here there are going to be no blood vessels. Okay, so there will be no arteries, no veins, and no capillaries too. There could be at the presence of the heart, could be there. Now open circulatory system occurs in, what are these options given? Is it earthworm, is it snail, is it cockroach, or is it both B and C? Well, earthworm belonging to the phylum Annelid is having a closed circulatory system. So their blood is basically always going to be flowing inside blood vessels. But talking about snail, these are mollusks, and cockroach which are arthropods. Okay, snails belonging to the phylum mollusk and cockroach belonging to the phylum arthropod. Okay, both of these are observing open circulatory system, and if you remember, mollusks have the blood which have got a copper pigment in it, and that copper pigment is going to be called as hemocyanin. Okay, so that is the reason why when we see the blood of snails, it is slightly bluish in color due to the presence of copper pigment in there. But when we talk about arthropods, and that too of a cockroach, these are having open circulatory systems. But when you see the blood of a cockroach or see the blood of any insect, okay, their blood is basically white in color. And because, why is it white in color? Because it lacks, or rather it does not have, it lacks a respiratory pigment. So neither is there hemocyanin and neither is there hemoglobin present. That's why their blood is seen to be white in color. And because the blood of cockroach is white in color, a fluid in our body, a circulating fluid which is white in color, is lymph. That's why the circulating fluid of an arthropod is basically going to be called as hemolymph. Alright, so over here open circulatory system occurs in both snails and cockroaches, so the correct option would be D. Next, a body cavity which is lined by mesoderm is, so we just spoke about this, what exactly cavity was, and when it is lined with mesoderm, you may call this cavity as D, that is coelom. Next, which of the following phylum is devoid of tissue? Now, when we talk about being devoid of tissue, then this means that there is no tissue present, okay? Absence of tissue. Absence of tissue, but it is a phylum, which means that it is a multicellular organism. So, this is a multicellular organism, which has not developed into a tissue. So it has basically just remained as a bunch of cells being put together, and a bunch of cells put together may be called as a cell aggregate. Okay, so when we talk about cell aggregate, which is the phylum that I'm speaking about, none other than the Poriferans. So the phylum which is devoid of tissue would be A, and that is Porifera. Next question, cold-blooded animals are also called, well, cold-blooded animals may also be called as poikilothermic. This is something we know, alright. But look at the words of ectotherms and endotherms. Well, ectotherms are those organisms which are depending on the external source for their source of heat, alright. So that's why they're called as ecto, because they're depending on the outside environment for their heat. So ectotherms. So when we talk about these cold-blooded animals, they would be both ectotherms, or you may call these as poikilothermic. So your correct answer would be D, both A and C. Endotherms are those organisms which are able to generate their own body heat. Like for example us, we are able to generate our own body heat because we are always having a lipid layer. That lipid layer constantly generates energy so that the heat can be made and our body temperature may remain constant. Alright, so talking about cold-blooded animals, they are either called as ectotherms or they may be called as poikilothermic, which is making our correct answer as answer D, both A and C. Alright. Next question, in which group of animals a closed circulatory system is present? So look from here. Arthropoda means it is an open circulatory system. Mollusca also being open, and Hemichordata also being open circulatory system, which we are going to be covering today. Alright. Talking about the closed one, it is Analytes. If you remember, we have studied this when we did about the earthworms, alright, where they are having a dorsal blood vessel, a ventral blood vessel, and then they have hearts which are joining these two. So basically the blood was always going to be flowing in those blood vessels and in thinner capillaries. Blood is not found in the whole body cavity. So it is D, Analytes, which have a closed circulatory system. Alright. Next question, radial symmetry is shown by. If you remember here, when we studied the table before, when we talked about the radial symmetry, okay, talking about the radial symmetry, there were all these three were present. There was Coelenterata, there was Ctenophora, and there was Echinodermata. So radially symmetrical animals are D, all of the above. In fact, these are the only three phylums which are showing radially symmetrical. Apart from Porifera, all the other phyla belong to bilaterally symmetrical animals. Alright. Next question. Animals which regulate their body temperature are called. So now, this is opposite of the question we just did a little while back, right? We talked about cold-blooded animals at that time. And when we talk about cold-blooded animals, the body temperature of these animals is never constant. Body temperature is always going to be according to their outside environment, right? But talking about this question, animals which regulate their body temperature, isn't that like talking about us? We are able to maintain our body temperature constant for the whole day, in fact. Alright, so now these animals are going to be called as warm-blooded animals, as you all know, right? But then look at the other names. The opposite of poikilothermic, which we saw, which was cold-blooded animals, is going to be called as homeothermic. So when we say that an animal is a homeotherm, then it's nothing but saying that the animal is a warm-blooded animal. And This animal or these animals which are warm-blooded, or you can call them as homeotherms, these are actually depending on the internal part of the body only in order to generate heat. So as I said a little while back, that it is our body which is basically depending upon the food that we eat for energy and also upon the reserved fats that we have stored, just so that we can maintain that our body temperature stays constant. So practically when you see A, B and C, whether we call it as warm-blooded or we call it as homeotherms or we call it as endotherms, all of these are the same terminology, and these are the terms used for all the animals which are able to regulate their body temperature. So the correct option here would be D, all of the above. Next question, which one is first evolved in annelids? Now, if you remember the charts that we have done, then in an annelid, the very first thing that we have seen, do you remember that? Wasn't it the coelom? If you remember the three worms, the first one Platyhelminthes, second one Aschelminthes, third one annelids. At the level of these three worms, the distinguishing character was specifically of coelom, and it is the annelids onwards where we are finding a true coelom being present. Okay, triploblastic bilateral symmetry and cephalization were all seen even before annelids. Okay, so when we're talking about annelid and only annelid, the first evolving thing was that of the coelom being present, that to a true coelom where the mesoderm was split in a proper way. Alright. Next, recognize the figure and find out the correct matching. So now let's see what figure is given. First of all, on one side they've given about polyp, on the other side they've given the medusa. If you remember, polyp and medusa were the two names of the body forms. Okay, these were two names of body forms. That too belonging to which phylum? It was the second phylum we learned, and that was the phylum of Cnidaria. Okay, Cnidaria. So Cnidaria, or we may also call this as the Coelenterata. Alright. So polyp is one form which was the sedentary form. Okay. And medusa was the other form which was the free swimming. It was a free swimming form. Alright. Now let's see further what the figure is indicating. We have an arrow pointing from polyp to medusa and another arrow pointing from medusa back to polyp. They've labeled this as A and B. So now let's figure out what exactly A is and what exactly B is. If you see this figure is actually showing the whole process of alternation of generation. Okay, that is alternation of generation. And if you remember which example this belonged to the example called as Obelia, okay, also commonly called as sea fur. So this is the manner in which the Obelia organism is going to reproduce, that is belonging to the phylum Cnidaria. This is seen as alternation of generation because we see that Obelia originally is in a polyp form, but when this Obelia is going to reproduce, this polyp form is not able to reproduce sexually. So this polyp form is going to be reproducing asexually in order to form an intermediate medusa form. Then the medusa is the form which is able to actually produce gametes. So since gametes are formed, that is why the medusa can reproduce sexually and form again back the polyp form. That's why we see that there is an alternating polyp and medusa form. So we call it as alternation of generation seen in the Obelia. So let's see the options that they've given here. As we have discussed, A should be an asexual method, okay, and B should be a sexual method. Alright, so talking about these options here, so we have A as asexually and B as sexually in option number B, that's here. Alright, what exactly is this word over here that they've mentioned here? Parthenogenetically. Parthenogenetically means that whenever a new organism can come into existence without any sort of reproduction taking place, means there's not going to be a sexual reproduction, there's not going to be an asexual either, but it would be as soon as the eggs are laid by the female, even without the sperms coming in, the egg would develop into an individual, as we see in certain arthropods like that of the honeybee. Alright. Next MCQ, nidoblasts are used for. Now if you remember, nidoblasts were those offense and defense mechanisms, okay, those cells which were there present in the phylum Cnidaria. Okay, they were present from phylum Cnidaria, and these were the major organs which were used for offense and for defense. Alright, over here the options which are given: first, capture of prey; second, anchorage; third, defense; or all of the above. So naturally, as we have seen here, offense and defense, and even anchoring the organism to a specific location. So the correct option would be D, and that would be all of the above. Next question. Correct flow of water current in sponges is. So now if we begin this here, when we talk about a sponge, first of all remember that there is going to be an underlying substratum. On that substratum the sponge is there, and let's draw it here. Okay, so now if this is the sponge that we are talking about, then you know that being a poriferan, there's going to be various minute openings on the body wall, and those minute openings are going to be called as ostia. So water basically enters into the sponge through the ostia. It circulates through that middle body cavity, which is called as the spongocoel, okay, and then the water will be flowing out through this one single opening which is present on the top, and that single opening is called as the osculum. Okay, it's called as osculum. So basically water is going to be flowing from ostia to the spongocoel, and through the osculum it goes outside. So looking for this option in our in the given options here, it should be first ostia, second spongocoel, third osculum, and fourth should be outside. That is option number C. Next MCQ, bioluminescent property is well marked in. If you remember, this was very prominently seen only in one phylum, and that phylum is that of the ctenophores. So ctenophores are the phylum which have bioluminescence. Alright. Next, when we talk about corals, corals are members of, if you remember corals, I had explained to you, these corals are useful, or rather economically useful in so many ways. They are actually being able to, whenever corals are found, they are found near the sea coast, the seashores. So now when we see here, corals are actually able to absorb all of those heavy currents which are coming from the oceans. So they prevent hurricanes, they prevent so many cyclones that could occur on the land area. Also, corals are made up of calcium carbonate. That's why they are used as a good source for making calcium supplements. So when we talk about their what exactly phylum do they belong to, these are belonging to the phylum of Cnidaria, or you may also call it as Coelenterata. Remember that corals are behaving as the rainforest of the ocean, and when we say that they are rainforests of the ocean, it's because they are also providing home, or rather a shelter, to thousands of small minute fishes which are there in the sea, where they could hide from from any enemy which is trying to hunt them down. Next, true segmentation is first observed in. When we talk about true segmentation, the first thing that we would see is the phylum Analytes, because even Platyhelminthes and Aschelminthes being worms, but they are not having any external segmentation being seen at all. Alright. So Aschelminthes also, if we see externally, there are not present of any segments. So the segmentations are beginning from Analytes onwards. Next option, excretory organ of planaria is. Now planaria belongs to the phylum Platyhelminthes, and Platyhelminthes as an excretory organ of excretion, they are having the flame cells. Why were they called as flame cells? Because they are going to be constantly flickering like that of a flame. These are also called as flame cells, or they may also be called as solenocytes. Okay, they are also called as solenocytes. So the correct option here would be A, flame cells or solenocytes. Another name for flame cells was called as protonephridia. Okay, so you may either call them as flame cells, you may call them as protonephridia, or you may call them as solenocytes. Alright. Next question, Select the incorrect statement from the following. So let's read these statements. First of all, Fasciola is a triploblastic animal. Fasciola means it's belonging to Platyhelminthes and it is a triploblastic animal. So that is correct. Radially symmetry is found in Cucumaria, Echinoderm. Yes, that would be correct too because echinoderms are radially symmetrical. Mesoglia is present in Physalia. Well, mesoglia means that this is going to be that part. Mesoglia is the part which is basically the layer between the endoderm and the ectoderm. Wherever we see that the mesoderm is not present, that is, mesoglia is indicative of the diploblastic organisms, all right, and Physalia being a cnidarian, it is a diploblastic animal. Next, when we talk about Taenia means we're talking about the tapeworms, okay, tapeworms, and tapeworms belong to the phylum Aschelminthes, okay, and Aschelminthes was the only phylum which was observing a coelom, which was actually a pseudocoelom. Okay, so Taenia is a pseudocoelomate animal. Alright, that would be the correct option. This is actually the incorrect statement. Alright, next when we see here, animals having dorso-ventrally flattened body organization is. Dorso-ventrally flattened. Dorsally means the part above and ventrally means the part below. So both of them being flat would be found in flatworms and that would be those of the Platyhelminthes, that is option C. Alright. Which of the following is not correctly matched? So let's see the matches over here. Okay. First, gregarious pest, and that is locust. Okay. Gregarious, basically the word gregarious means that they're going to be fond of company. Alright. So locust, yes, they are fond of company. Living fossil, limulus or king crab. Why is this king crab called as a living fossil? Because ever since it has actually come into existence, ever since then up till today, the king crab has shown either very minute, or rather you can say there have been no signs of evolution taking place. That's why it is called as the living fossil. Third, economically important insects, apis. Apis is honeybee. Well, honeybees are important because we get honey as well as bee wax from them and even royal jelly. Bombyx mori is the scientific name for a silkworm which while building the cocoon is actually the silk that we are going to obtain. The last one, vectors. Vectors, what exactly is a vector? So now the whole game of a disease, okay, starts with the causative factor. Okay, when we talk about the causative factor, you may call this as the parasite, or you may call this as the causative organism. Okay, causative factor has to reach the person where it wants to infect, and that person who is going to be infected is going to be called as the host. But what exactly is going to take that causative factor and give it to the host? If it is a living organism, then it will be called as a vector. So for example, when we talk about mosquitoes, you know that mosquitoes are going to be causing diseases like malaria. But actually it is not the mosquito who is responsible for causing malaria, because it is inside the body of a mosquito where there is a unicellular organism present. And when that unicellular organism enters into our body, it is that organism which is causing malaria. Has the mosquito caused malaria? No. But the mosquito has helped taking that unicellular organism and putting it inside the body of a human. So, since mosquito has helped in the spread of the disease, that living organism, which is the mosquito, is going to be called as the vector. So, when you see here, vector is always something which is capable of spreading the disease. So, here mosquitoes being a vector, Anopheles, Culex and Aedes, yes, this is correct. But then the other option that's given of the lac insect is definitely not a vector. In fact, the lac insect is giving us lac, okay, and around 80% of the whole lac produced worldwide, in fact, is produced from India itself. Alright, so lac insect is not a vector, so our correct option would be D over here. The largest phylum of Animalia, that would be the most successful phylum of Animalia, and that is none other than the arthropods, that is option C. The most distinctive feature of an echinoderm. If you remember, when we spoke about echinoderms, the starfishes we spoke about, the most characteristic striking feature which is seen in them was none other than the water vascular system. Okay, all the others are characteristics of echinoderms, but when we talk about the most distinctive feature, then the option chosen has to be C, that is presence of the water vascular system. All right, if you remember, into this system, what was the name of that opening through which water entered in? It was called as none other than the madreporite, through which water enters in. All right. Next, which is sanguivorous? What is the meaning of sanguivorous? Sanguivorous basically means blood sucking. Okay, the animals which feed on blood, and that would be, let's see the options here. Male cockroach, no, male cockroach is not at all. Leech, female mosquito. Leeches and the female mosquitoes are going to be feeding on blood. In fact, why only female? I'll tell you, male mosquitoes do not bite you. All the mosquitoes which have bit you until now are all going to be the female ones. And why is that? Generally, whenever a mosquito comes to bite you, it only means that this mosquito is pregnant. And because she is pregnant, she needs nutrition for her developing egg. And that is why she comes to us to bite us, so that she can get our blood, which is full of so many nutrients and proteins which her developing egg would require. So the sanguivorous one, the blood sucking, okay, blood sucking organisms here are both B and C, that is leech and the female mosquito. Which is associated with pearl formation? This is very straight answer. It is D, that is Pinctada. Excretory organs of arthropods are, which are those? If you remember, Malpighian tubules seen in the cockroaches, the insects. Coxal glands seen in arachnids, spiders. Green glands or antennal glands seen in crustaceans like that of a prawn. So here the answer would be D, all of the above. All of them are seen in arthropods. In arthropods, the balancing organ is, if you remember, this has to be C, statocyst, used as the balancing organ. In mollusks, gills, which are feather-like gills, okay, they have, what do they have? These gills, if you remember, these are the ones which are present between the mantle and the viscera which was there, okay. So the gills over there have two functions basically. Those two functions would be excretory and the respiratory functions, all right. Next, the last MCQ. Aristotle's lantern occurs in which class of echinodermata? Aristotle's lantern, if you remember, the echinoderms may have a 5-jawed teeth which is going to be used for chewing, okay. Either you can call it as chewing, or another name for chewing, it could be called as mastication, all right. Then that would be the class of echinoidea, where they have that 5 jaws as the teeth, and that those 5 jaws are called as Aristotle's lantern. All right. So that was all for all the MCQs that we have done today. Let us conclude our lecture today, today's session, with phylum Hemichordata. Okay. Now, first of all, understand why it is called as Hemichordata. It is called as Hemichordata because it has something in its structure which is looking like a notochord. I am not calling it as a notochord because if at all it was a notochord, then I would categorize these under chordates. But I am keeping this, I choose to keep this under non-chordates because actually the substance that is there is just looking like a notochord, but it is rather not a notochord actually. Okay, so let's begin. Phylum Hemichordata, alright, first of all, the habit. These are seen to be only marine organisms, okay. These are found to be living at the most bottom of the sea. They may also be called as an acorn, okay. They may also be called as acorn worms, okay. They are mostly free living, okay. We see that there are some examples of hemichordates which can be bound to a substratum, like that of a Rhabdopleura. Rhabdopleura are those hemichordates which are found to be sedentary. Okay. Next, talking about the body of this. Okay, very distinguishing body. As I told you, it looks like a worm. So we see that it is soft, it is fragile. Look at this third word over here, and that word is called as vermiform. Now, when we say it is vermiform, It means that it is worm-like. Okay, worm-like means worm form. Then we say that it is unsegmented and it is divided into basically three parts. So looking at this organism, let us see which are those three parts here. Okay, the very first part would be the proboscis. Okay, the proboscis is this part over here. Okay, this is actually the part which this organism is going to be using for digging and for burrowing into the seabed. Okay, also I'd like to mention that it is this proboscis which is the excretory part used. Okay, so the organ for excretion for a hemichordate will be none other than its proboscis. Okay, next the next part here is this region over here, which is nothing but the collar region, and then the remaining whole part is going to be called as the trunk. So when we talk about this worm over here, or rather when we talk about this hemichordate here, there are three parts to it: the proboscis, the collar, and the trunk. All right. Okay, next talking about the digestive system here, or rather the part why it was called as the hemichordate. Let's see that. When we talk about the buccal cavity, that is opening of the digestive system, this gives rise to a part which is called as the buccal diverticulum, if you can see. And when this buccal diverticulum was seen, it looked exactly like a notochord. So this buccal cavity, okay, it was giving rise to the buccal diverticulum. This buccal diverticulum could also be called as the stomochord. Why stomo? Stomo means mouth. Okay, so it is a cord-like structure which was arising from the mouth, and because it was looking like a notochord, this is the basic reason why we are calling the animals of this phylum as hemichordates, because they have a structure which is the buccal diverticulum, which is looking like a notochord. Okay. Now we see here that these are going to be feeding on microorganisms which are present in water by ciliary action. How are they doing this by ciliary action? Look at this opening here. Okay, first of all, understand that this opening here, okay, I'll erase that marking that I've made. This opening here is the mouth, alright, and surrounding the mouth region, there are going to be so many cilia present. Now those cilia which are present are going to enable to bring in all the food. So the cilia will help in taking the food in, and once the food is in, you can see how the proboscis has come back down and the mouth has been covered again. So basically we see that these are those organisms which are going to be feeding on microorganisms which are present in the water by the ciliary action. Where is the cilia present? Near the mouth opening. Alright. Then we see that as we spoke about it a little while back, that the proboscis that is there is going to be helping in making burrows, okay, that is digging inside the seabed. So that is burrowing. It is the proboscis that is the outermost part, the anterior most part, which helps this organism to dig, while the entire body, that is the remaining part, especially the trunk region, is going to allow this to swim into the water. So that is the trunk region which is allowing to actually bring about movement in this worm. Alright, we see that the digestive system is complete. When I say it is complete, this means that the mouth is present over here and the anus would be present at the opposite end. It is either complete or it may be straight in certain organisms, or certain organisms it may be U-shaped. Now if it is U-shaped, then also mouth and anus are going to be separate, but we may see that the mouth and anus are aligned together instead of being at opposite ends. Alright. Talking about the respiration in these organisms, there are paired gills. Can you see over here these blue colored paired gills which are present? And noting where is it present. Again, we demarcate the parts. This was called as the proboscis. This was called as the collar, and this part here was called as the trunk. Alright. So there are paired gill slits here which are opening into a pharynx so that the respiratory gases can be passed to the pharynx region. Alright. Talking about the circulatory system, remember this is an important point here, okay, as per the MCQs. The circulatory system in a hemichordate is seen to be an open type, and the heart is situated dorsally like any other invertebrate. Okay, nervous system here. Nervous tissue is embedded, means that there is nervous tissue present everywhere in the epidermis, okay, and that too on the epidermis on the dorsal side as well as on the epidermis on the ventral side, which means that the nervous tissue is basically going to be on the exterior parts of the organism, okay, dorsally and ventrally. When we talk about the reproductive system of this organism, we see that the sexes here are separate, okay, so there is going to be a male and a female separately. But the fertilization which is seen externally, which means that gametes will be formed, gametes will be thrown into the water, but the fertilization, that is the fusion of gametes, is going to be happening in the water. Fusion of gametes is not happening inside the female body. That's why we say that the fertilization here is external. Development being indirect, which is going to show that there's going to be a larva form present here. All right. Let's see the names of the two examples which are present here. First example is called as the Sacoglossus, okay, and the second example is called as the Belanoglossus, also known as acorn worm. Now, in this whole phylum, most commonly asked are these two examples. So, you need to know the names of these examples by heart, that they both are belonging to the phylum of Hemichordata. First example is Sacoglossus. Second example is called as the Belanoglossus. Alright. So children, we have completed with the whole invertebrates, the non-chordates. Alright. We also went through some very important MCQs, and towards the beginning of this lecture, I hope you recollect, we have done the tables together. Those tables are going to be extremely helpful when you sit to solve your MCQs. Alright. Our next lecture is going to be all about the introduction and general characteristics of chordates, okay, where we're going to be studying about ourselves, that are the mammals too. So stay tuned, stay with me at Yupp Master. Do subscribe to my page if you haven't done so until yet, and hit the like button if you enjoyed this lecture.